Thank you, Julia. This time of day, I always look around and see how many people are still awake. I deliberately didn't wear my glasses so I wouldn't embarrass anyone. The next session, Mitigating Risk, Cooperation in Action. We have 3 speakers, 2 in person and 1 coming in online, as far as I'm aware. And very brief introductions. The first 2 talks are really a tag team talk about a project called MiLCA. And I'll let Andrew explain what MiLCA is. Our first speaker will be Andrew, coming out of Fonterra. And he is a 30-year veteran of the dairy industry. He probably doesn't like me saying that. But he's currently leader of sustainable food systems. And he has a very strong interest in how technology innovations are captured in carbon footprints. And the second part of that tag team will be Aaron Simmons, coming in from Australia, across the ditch, at the Department of Primary Industries, New South Wales, who's an expert in LCA. As someone who's already been involved in the MiLCA project, Aaron's learned one of life's great lessons, which was when you have 6 partners in a project and you're trying to please them all, you're actually not trying to please 6 partners, you're trying to please about 10 opinions. And he's had to learn that over about the last year. And then our third speaker is Nick Donald, who is from MPI. And he is currently leading the development of MPI's standardised approach for calculating emissions. And obviously in that, he's got to delicately balance a whole lot of interests, and he will explain how he's been doing that, trying to get a very robust approach that's aligned to industry and reduces the burden on farmers. So first of all, I'll hand over to Andrew.
Kia ora tātou, and thank you, Harry, for the introduction. So I'm just going to apologise in advance if things go badly awry in this presentation, because with Aaron across the ditch, 1 set of slides, I've got to continue to keep the slides updated for him once he starts talking. So we're going to talk about MiLCA, which is about a protocol for including mitigation technologies into LCAs. And I'm going to really talk about the why. Why do we care about this? Why is it necessary? Why have various organisations partnered together to do this? And Aaron's going to then talk about the what. What have we actually done? What does it say? What do we think the right way of doing it is? So this is a journey we set out on a group of partners. You can see the logos at the bottom, to develop a protocol that lets us account for the use of some of the new technologies that are emerging, that we're going to be talking about quite a bit tomorrow, how we're going to account for those and include those into product lifecycle assessments, product footprints, and essentially the carbon footprint claims that are associated with products that are traded within the dairy supply chain. Okay, and amongst that, we want to look at, okay, what's the technology base, what's the evidence base that needs to be there to support that, and then how do we turn that evidence and the information we have around the use of those things into a conservative claim that has a high level of confidence that the benefits that we in the supply chain are claiming have actually been realised. You know, because we're highly conscious of, you know, there are people out there who want to see us make a misstep. There are people out there who arguably don't even want us to have some of these mitigation technologies because they'd rather see our sectors shrink. And so we've got to make sure that we stay above board, we're very clear, and you know, we cannot easily be accused of greenwashing. So that's why we sort of got together. Now, we started from a point of view where we actually have some very well-established protocols for doing carbon footprints within the dairy sector. The image there is of the cover page of the IDF Carbon Footprint Guide, the 3rd version of that guide, which was published in 2022. That arose from a piece of work that actually was initiated by Fonterra back in 2008, 2009, in response to the conversation around food miles and our fact of being a long way from markets. We needed to actually be able to objectively talk about the credentials of our systems and get away from an oversimplified discussion. So we started some work on that and recognised we needed that to be a global approach. Global collaboration, really powerful in making sure that we're not the sole voice, we're not the only ones using the standard or this approach, and get that noise out so that the sector as a whole is in a stronger position. And it's been very powerful for the dairy sector to have this common approach. However, as we were finishing this latest revision back in 2022, we realised we didn't have anything in there around the use of emerging mitigation technologies, how they would fit in, how they'd be treated, and we didn't have time to fit it in and still deliver the thing, so we decided we'd take that off the table and do this as a separate piece of work. Some of us got together around it. And so there were two gaps. What is the robust scientific evidence standards that are required to ensure that the efficacy claims are actually well-founded, there's a good body of evidence, and then how to actually go about doing the calculation to actually put those claims into an LCA and the actual value that gets claims. So that was what we were after. And so the focus, I touched on this before, the focus of this is about life cycle assessments of the type done by companies within the supply chain. It's about the carbon footprint that the change in the carbon footprint of our products in terms of our commercial transactions one with another. The key principles we were after is that the protocol would deliver a robust and conservative approach to how we do this, okay? And that ideally that will also drive behaviour in the right direction. So that for technology developers and people using these technologies would drive towards the collection and use of better data to get more accurate estimations of their benefits to then be able to support more stronger claims in the future. So with that as an introduction, I'm going to now, hopefully Aaron is online, otherwise I'm going to have to talk to the slides, which I'll mess up. You there, mate?
I am. Hello from the muggy and warm mid-north coast of New South Wales, the land of cockatoo in the summer and ryegrass in the winter. I can't see the presentation at the moment.
So I think
that's it. I can see it now. Okay.
We may have to lose your face, mate, and just get the slides.
Right. So you can hear me all right, Andrew?
Yep.
Okay. So I don't have long to talk, but what I will do is take everyone through the key principles that were integrated into the protocol and just give a high-level overview of what they actually look like in the protocol. So the four that are currently integrated into the framework, noting that this still hasn't been finalised, is that, first of all, we wanted to make sure that that it was demonstrated that technologies were safe. So this was about making sure consumers had confidence in the technologies that were implemented in a dairy system. There also had to be demonstration that the technologies are effective, and so we set guidelines around what constitutes, demonstration that a technology is effective, and again, that's so that there's confidence around the implementation of the technology. As Andrew mentioned, claims need to be conservative. So we built in an approach to actually integrate a conservative assessment for claims so that we had a good degree of confidence that claims didn't overestimate the mitigation that had actually occurred. And then we also built in that framework an approach around data so that, data needs to be appropriate for its use. Okay, next slide, please, Andrew. So when we look at technologies being safe, what we need people that will use the protocol to do is actually provide written evidence. And it needs to document, if required, that there's regulatory approval for the implementation of the technology. For some, there may be no regulatory approval required, and that may be also depend on the geography that is being implemented. There needs to be a life cycle assessment that's compliant with international standards, and that looks at relative indicators or relevant indicators, so that we understand that just by reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we're not creating a problem somewhere else. Understand what those trade-offs are. And then also impacts to the farming system. So that's making sure that there's no negative impacts on animal health, but also that product quality is robust. So there needs to be a demonstration that by implementing technology, we're not actually potentially harming the consumers in the end. So again, it's all about generating confidence in a technology. Okay, next slide, Andrew. So when it comes to technologies being effective, we came up with this concept of demonstrated repeatable reductions. And so for demonstrated repeatable reductions to actually, be demonstrated, we set essentially 3 bars, and one of those have to be surpassed. One is that there's a peer-reviewed meta-analysis, and that peer review needs to have occurred in a journal of high quality, high scientific rigour, so it can't be peer-reviewed and published in a low-quality journal. So we actually set standards around that. there can be 3 individual peer-reviewed studies, and so that's showing that it's repeatable. So a meta-analysis, is when you get the results from multiple studies and you aggregate them into one statistical analysis. So the 3 peer-reviewed scientific studies would be 3 individual studies. They could then, at some point in time, be aggregated up into a meta-analysis. And the other one was a methodology from an existing methodology from a carbon crediting scheme. And we actually set standards around that carbon crediting scheme. So somebody can't go and start their own scheme and develop a methodology and use this. There's global standards around what makes a robust carbon crediting scheme, and that they have their own requirements for methodologies they implement. And so we actually set the standards around that and the expectations that need to be met around that. When it comes to actually calculating the claimed greenhouse gas emissions reduction, we rely on that evidence that's provided as part of that initial demonstrated repeatable reductions, and then it's up to the user to pick up the most relevant research and to apply that to the situation that they're actually calculating the greenhouse gas emissions claim for. Okay, next slide, Andrew. So conservative claims, a conservative claim is responsible. So this is about the dairy sector claiming responsibility. We could claim the average, but that's not being particularly responsible because we don't have good confidence or a high degree of confidence that we're not over-crediting if we claim the average or the mean. And conservative or generating or making a conservative claim is actually a key principle in multiple existing global frameworks, whether they're a carbon credit scheme. It's actually in Article 6.4 of the Paris Agreement. One of the recent parts of that was passed actually stipulates that a claim must be conservative. So there needs to be a certain degree of confidence that you're not claiming greenhouse gas emissions reductions when they didn't occur. And it was part of the UNFCCC, that conservative claim was part of the UNFCCC claim development mechanism, which is now being surpassed by Article 6.4 of the Paris Agreement. But it just shows that in international standards, this is one of the basic tenets. Now, I won't go into too much about the proposed mechanism to do this, but I will briefly say that because time is limited, what we built into it was essentially a probability of exceedance approach. And so what that means is if you take the mean, there's a 50% chance that if you take the mean of a sample, or you estimate the mean of a sample using a calculation, there's a 50% chance that the true mean will be greater than that or lower than that. And so what we said was we wanted to shift the value that we credited, or the claim that we made, so that we had a 70% chance that the true mean was actually greater than what we were estimating. And so that meant that we reduced the chance that we were actually over-crediting. The other reason for taking that approach is that it's based on statistical uncertainty. And what that does is it compels people that are doing the research around demonstrating repeatable emissions reductions from a particular technology to do good research, because if you have poor data, you have greater statistical uncertainty, which then means that your adjustment based on your probability of exceedance would be greater than if you had really high quality research that had low statistical uncertainty. So it was actually put in place deliberately to try and drive high quality research to underpin the demonstration of these repeatable emissions reductions. So again, to provide confidence to the supply chain and to consumers that this was a real thing. Next one, please, Andrew. And the final one was that data needs to be appropriate. So essentially what we thought was, well, if I have a technology and I want to implement it here where I'm based on the mid-north coast of New South Wales, I can't really use data from a dairy farm in New Zealand. So we picked up an existing framework and modified that slightly around quality categories for data. And so really what we were saying was the data that gets used to calculate the greenhouse gas emissions reduction claim needs to be assessed against when it was collected. So if data was collected between 3 to 6 years, then you get a discount essentially. So you get an additional discount on top of the statistical uncertainty. Or if you use your neighbour's data, you get a discount. If you use regional averages, you get a greater discount. And then it basically says that you can't use anything outside your region if you want to actually make a claim. So it incentivises people to collect on-farm data, because that means that they can actually get a greater claim because their discount is reduced. The key point is, for the highest level of data quality that you can use, if a farmer does that, or if a co-op collects that highest quality data, then there's actually no discount that's applied. So it's trying to get people to actually get appropriate data, high quality data that underpins a good, robust claim that provides, generates confidence within the supply chain and within consumers. Pardon me. And I can't see, but I think that is my final slide. And I'd say we're just about to hit 12 minutes. So as long as that is my final slide, I will leave it at that. So that's actually a very high level. It's quite more in depth, but I just didn't have a lot of time to actually go into more depth and provide more detail. Now I can't hear anything.
Thank you, both Andrew and Aaron. I think we'll have the next presentation, and I'll take questions right at the end. So, Nick, the floor's yours.
Thanks so much. Cool. So, hi everybody. My name is Nick Donald, and I'm the Agricultural Emissions Lead at MPI. And so today, what I'm going to talk through is not the methodology that we've developed itself, but rather why we need a standardised methodology, how we've developed it with the sector, and what we're looking to do with it as we move forward. As a bit of context setting, from a government perspective, there are two key policy objectives that we're looking to achieve at the moment. The first one is having pricing in place by 2030. The second one is having measurement in place by 2025. To be really clear, when we say measurement, we don't mean reporting. What we mean is that a measurement methodology is available to be used by farmers. In terms of the scope of what we're talking about, we're really covering off biogenic emissions which come from livestock and fertiliser. What this means is that we're constraining the scope to what would be priced under a pricing scheme, given that other on-farm emissions already are covered by the ETS. In terms of the overarching principles of what's underpinned our development, there's four key ones. So one is around transparency, ensuring that what we've developed is really able to be scrutinised at a level of detail. So every equation, every data table, all of the science. We've also tried to consider the trade-offs for effectiveness, so ensuring that we're capturing the material drivers of emissions on farm. It also needs to be equitable to reflect the nuances within different farming systems. And then finally, it needs to be practical. So while we would love to try and measure every single thing on a farm, what's more important is that we don't impose an undue burden on farmers. And so really, those are the kind of guiding principles that have informed our development over time. And I guess, Aidan, when you were talking about minimising that burden on farmers and not creating multiple different ways or multiple obligations, that really hit home with us in terms of some of our work. So why standardisation? Well, with an eye to pricing, it's really important that we have a robust, auditable and high integrity approach for estimating emissions on farm. But in addition to that, and on the way towards 2030, there's significant value to be realised from standardisation. Critically, a lot of that benefit really comes from the stability and confidence that comes from having a single government-backed way of doing things. And by having a single standardised approach, what we think is that we can provide the confidence and stability to enable ongoing investment in emissions reduction. Because we're talking about standardisation, what's really important is recognising where some of those benefits lie, right? And so where the benefits lie predominantly are really with the consumers of that GHG reporting information and the administrators of those existing GHG reporting systems, which include processors and financial services organisations. Currently, these organisations have a number of potential inputs when it comes to emissions reporting, and so by having a standardised approach, the emphasis is really around improving system integrity and confidence, which can then have subsequent benefits in terms of transaction costs associated with compliance and assurance of those reporting regimes, and where relevant, incentives programs such as sustainable lending, or sustainability-linked loans, or other processor-based incentives. This does flow through to farmers who currently do bear a bit of cost when it comes to accessing incentive programs and GHG reporting. And so by having a standardised approach which is emphasising that minimised burden, we're hoping to make their lives a little bit easier as well. The other key component of this approach is that we're able to really clearly define the role of government and articulate the benefits for NZACC. So today we heard a lot from a range of different stakeholders around the expectations of global customers, the market access considerations, the ongoing trade considerations with places like the EU and China. And so having the full weight of the New Zealand government behind our approach means that we can bring that weight to those negotiations, right? We're able to champion this approach in those bilateral trade negotiations. We're able to bring this approach to facilitate a range of international engagement with OECD, with the UN, and with the EU as well. And what that means is that we're also able to champion the science by making sure that our approach is seen as commensurate with some of those key trading partners as well. In terms of the work we've done to date, ideally we would have started by lifting and shifting something that existed today. So we started with a review of the existing 12 greenhouse gas calculators that are floating around. From that review, we determined that nothing really met the criteria of being transparent enough to really substantiate a pricing system, or was broad enough in its coverage to really canvass the full scope of all livestock within the ag sector. So we then developed a draft methodology with guidance from a technical advisory group. That group comprised some of New Zealand's leading experts when it comes to methane emissions, nitrous oxide, farm systems, and had a range of experts from across the dairy and red meat sectors, including sheep and beef and deer as well. Their advice was to basically follow global best practice, which is translating our national inventory approach to the farm level, which enables us to maintain a really clear line of sight between what we're doing on the farm, how those equations flow through, and our international commitments. Once we'd developed that draft methodology, we then went on an extensive engagement process with the sector where we spoke with over 300 different stakeholders, every industry organisation, I think almost every processor across dairy and red meat, as well as a range of other stakeholders. We also compiled about 50 different case studies across a range of farming systems to really make sure that we were testing out what we did. As a result of that engagement, we heard two key pieces of feedback from the sector. The first one was the importance of recognising some of the nuances between, say, breeding and finishing farms, autumn and spring calving. And so to achieve that, we made some adjustments to the way that we think about newborn stock classes and included a monthly based calculation to ensure that we're not overestimating emissions. The second change was really around ensuring that our approach to feed and nutrition was consistent with what the industry was doing and the feeds that the industry was actually feeding to their livestock. And so as a result of that, we expanded our feed list based on some advice from Ag Research, based on what we found in dairy base. And we also looked to include some in-situ feeds to get as much coverage as possible in terms of those areas of interest from a red meat sector as well. And so off the back of that, we're in a position now where we've got a really strong methodology. We're really confident with the feedback we've received. And as a result, we're in the final stages of documenting and coding that. And the Minister today outlined that will be released by the end of Q4, which is New Year's Eve. Lucky me. Cool. So in terms of our approach for adoption and release, in line with our principles of transparency, we're kind of putting everything out there. The first two documents that we're looking to release comprise of a technical document, so that kind of canvasses all of the science, heavily references New Zealand's inventory model, and outlines all of our data tables and supporting parameters as well. In addition to that, we will be releasing the code base, so that's all of the actual executable code that's required to operate the methodology. This audience is really intended for ag tech processors and developers who might want to lift and shift that entire code base and stick it into their existing tools. They might want to use it for science. They might want to interrogate specific components of that. Regardless of what they want to use it for, it'll be freely available for them to interrogate. Finally, we are also looking to create a data specification. So the quality of our methodology is only as good as the inputs that come in. It's a long-standing challenge in the ag sector. And so what we've tried to do is define a very specific set of inputs and catalogue those within a data specification. And what that means is that we're able to facilitate improved opportunities around things like data integration and API integration between a whole range of stakeholders in the ag sector. That will be released slightly later, because what's really important when you're creating something like that is sector engagement. But I guess at this point in time, I'd like to touch on one of the comments that was made around, how do we make sure this thing doesn't wither on the vine, right? And so to do that, we were faced with a couple of options. We could either convince 20,000 farmers to take all of their information and stick it into yet another farm calculator. Sounds like a great idea, hopefully not. The alternative is that we could try and make this change in the back. So change the methodology within existing calculators, within existing tools, and ensure that actually there's almost no negligible impact when it comes to the day-to-day of farm-level emissions reporting. And so to do that, what we've done is we've decided to partner with Ag Research to embed our farm emissions methodology within the heart of their life cycle assessment model. What this means is that we can effectively drive uptake across all existing farms who complete LCA assessments as part of their ongoing process of reporting requirements, which helps us to provide a really strong, solid foundation and a really great basis for adoption. But there are many other benefits for partnering with Ag Research. They're a massive centre of excellence when it comes to thinking about things like life cycle assessment, alignment with your conversation as well. And most crucially, it enables us to align to their development roadmap when it comes to that life cycle assessment. And so there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes around how the life cycle assessment, and specifically the farm level component of that, can be enabled and supported by APIs to ensure that we can seamlessly call on that methodology and spit out a number back to farmers who might be using their native farm management system. They might be using an Overseer or a FarmX, or they may be using some other farmer-facing calculator. In terms of next steps, we've covered off the release of the technical document and the code base and driving adoption of the standardised method. From an MPI perspective, we are about to engage in another round of international policy discussions to ensure that our method is seen as commensurate and meets the needs of market access and global customer expectations. There's been a number of discussions already with a huge number of our trading partners, but what's important is to recognise that's an iterative conversation and that we tend to have some slightly different areas of emphasis. Next, and potentially most crucially from a government perspective, we will be actively incorporating and recognising mitigation technologies at the farm level. So what's really important for us is that the investment that the government's making from a accelerating new mitigations perspective, from an Agri-Zero perspective, and from a GRA perspective, really flows through into this farm level method, and that we have a robust, transparent, standardised way of recognising that on farm. Finally, it's worth flagging that this is the first iteration of this method. It will change as the industry changes. And so in order to manage that in a way which makes sense, we are going to establish an operating model and supporting processes for managing that improvement process. And so that will include changes to the science, it will include mitigation changes, It will also include extensive industry consultation to make sure that this method remains fit for purpose. So I'm happy to finish off there. Thanks, Harry.
Big thank you to all our speakers. I have a host of questions, and I'll try and synthesize a couple of them. And the top two questions I'll try and bring into one, and it's really Aaron or Andrew, I think, for this one, is how does the MiLCA protocol address the combined impact of multiple interventions on a specific farm, and also allied to that, how does it address the layering of mitigation interventions, which you may have, maybe two technologies that are addressing the same emission?
That's a good question. I was turned off. That's the answer. So in terms of, I think, so it doesn't directly address it in the sense of, or what it does is it says, there's got to be an evidence base to support any claim. And if you've got layered mitigation technologies, if you've got two technologies that are, well, if we think about a farm situation, we've got two completely different sources of gas on the farm where you're putting in mitigation technology. So you're doing something with your effluent system, you're doing something with your enteric methane. Those are completely different. It's easy to see how those two can be independent of each other. Where you're doing something which you've got things that are targeting the same cause, so two things aiming at enteric methane would be the obvious one in a domestic situation here. What it says is you've got to have the science that actually supports the fact that you can layer these two things on top of each other. It's as simple as that. Unfortunately, what it says, we can't until there's a science base that gives us a theoretical understanding that is, that everyone accepts internationally around our ability to stack mitigations. We've got to actually have the experimental evidence which shows that mitigation A plus mitigation B will actually deliver a result that is greater than either of them, and may hopefully be the same as A plus B.
Thanks, Andrew. In the interest of fairness, I'll push one on to Nick as well. This one's an interesting one. I think it's really a terminology issue. You used the word measure when you talked about on farm. And as the question is, how are you going to measure emissions on farm? And it does apply to MiLCA slightly, because measuring emissions costs millions and millions of dollars.
It's a great question, Harry. Our preferred language would be estimate, to be very clear. I think one of the challenges we have is measurement has made it into the public parlance, and so as a consequence, that's the language we're using. But effectively, we are estimating emissions. That's correct.
Yeah. Thank you. And this one, I given a New Zealand angle to this one, Andrew and Aaron. Does the MiLCA protocol, if adopted globally by dairy companies, give an advantage or disadvantage to New Zealand farmers and farm systems?
I think the answer to that is no more than is otherwise present in the challenge we have around finding things that fit with our farming systems, right? One of the things that is there to remember, though, is actually, even when we start to look at Europe, a component of the year, European dairy cows are essentially pastorally farmed and are not spending that much time in a feedlot. Right? So even other parts of the world, it's only when you get to a very limited portion that you have complete intensive feedlot systems. And obviously they have an advantage in putting in place, in using many of these technologies and in being able to simplify accounting of them because they know all the inputs. So I don't think it makes the situation any worse than it otherwise is for us in terms of the challenge we already have to overcome with pastoral systems.
Do you think there's then an advantage in it for us that there is a common methodology adopted by all with the same rigor, that we can have confidence that claims globally are backed up by a rigorous standard?
Yes, I do. And I think it's, so one of the other hats I wear is I'm co-chair of the IDF's action team on life cycle assessment, which is the group that's responsible for maintaining the IDF's LCA standards, both on carbon and water. And there is a tremendous New Zealand has always been a strong supporter of global standards. We're a trading nation. It's really important for us that there is one consistent set of rules so that we're not having arguments around differences in methodology within the sector globally. And I think that's important for the sector globally as well, because it helps with our overall credibility. If we're seen as fighting amongst ourselves, then our detractors can then point to it and say, you can't even sort your own act out, why should we trust you? This is about transparency, trust. The more we have consistent standards, the better.
Thanks very much, Andrew. And unfortunately, although I've got 2 pages of questions, I will have to draw this to a close. But I'd like to thank all the speakers for a fascinating session. And my job is done for the day. I can now hand over to my boss, and she will take it from here to give a summary of the day's proceedings.
My job is not quite done, but almost. So my job is just to wrap up our day, and what a day. So thank you to everyone in the room for a great day, for the great conversations that I've heard you have, for the patience of those who are watching online, for the fantastic questions that have been asked. I'm conscious that we haven't been able to get to a large number of those. We will be capturing those so that we can play those back to you and hopefully also put some of those back to our speakers, but hopefully you're also asking them those questions out in the foyer. Thank you to all of our speakers and our chairs for their insights, their energy, and for keeping to time, which I'm very, very proud of them for. It's so important to be able to get through everyone. So just to recap the day, we started with Jim Skier's comments, which were sobering, on our progress towards keeping within 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming and the challenge that we still have ahead of us. Minister McLeay, in his opening speech, outlined the government's priorities and actions and commitments. Stuart Horn shared his perspectives 2 months into his role as Climate Change Ambassador and on his recent return from COP29. Rod Carr pushed us on the choices that can and should be made now to reduce wider emissions, as well as pushing hard for new technologies and new options. Wayne, Kelly and I talked a bit about our collective efforts to accelerate availability of technologies and how we're working together on that. Tom, Andy, Charles and Adrian talked about the perspective and insights of investors into technologies and the need for more investments, and discussed some of the issues on who should pay. That's a thread. Diana, Neil, Jenna, Catherine, Simon gave us a fantastic range of perspectives on the increasingly important trade and market drivers. The importance of data and partnering with the primary sector came through very strongly, as did the trends are only going in one direction. Aidan, Carly and Amelia moved us into finance and reporting, the importance of messaging, increased standardisation, the value of reporting for decision-making and strategy, and that internationally disclosures are moving fast, including in our key markets, with a strong message that sustainability is just going to be part of doing business. And finally, Andrew, Aaron and Nick gave us a great update on a couple of projects aimed at standardising calculators and with a nod to the stackability challenge. So I think the key summary for me is that there was a really strong thread of both challenge and hope. There are things we can do. The drivers are lining up behind the solutions. Solutions are coming. And New Zealand farmers are still, to quote, way in the hunt to be thriving low emissions farmers. So what a day, what a fantastic lot of speakers, and can you please join me in a further round of applause for all of them.